Welcome to 2025, which sounds kind of crazy to say, and our first event of the year. So we decided to do a virtual event just because in Minnesota, you never know what the roads are going to be like, and we didn't want people to have to panic to try to get someplace. We want to make sure that you get the information that you're here to get. So virtual was the way to go for this event. We've got some really great information for you. So I'm going to start with some announcements and kind of get things started, and then we'll get right into the content that we have prepared. So first is introductions. Kyla, next. Look at these people. So Trina is our program director. She was on the board last year in the associate role. This year, she is moving into the program director role. And I am Crystal. I am the associate program director this year. I'm new to the board. We're very excited for all the things that we're going to put together for this year. We're really excited to put some really special events together and some amazing content. We know that artificial intelligence is all the rage and buzz everywhere. Know that we're working on that. We've already had some conversations with sponsors, had some conversations with some organizations. We're looking to put some really good content around AI on the books for the year. We'll touch on it a tad here, but for the most part, we're going to stick to kind of our prepared questions, but know that we hear you and that will be coming. Next. February's event is on the 20th. It is an in-person and virtual event. It's a fully sponsored event by Fathom. The topic for the conversation you can see here is called Designing Safe, Usable Medical Devices Through Inclusive User Research. And so that's a case study where the team will walk through some of their work there. We'll send the invitation out next week sometime, so just keep your eyes peeled for that. And then you can get out there and register, because I'm sure seats will fill quickly because it's an in-person event and there's limited seating. So when you see it, get after it. Okay, next. Do you want to speak at an event? So if you have an interesting topic, you've got some things to say, you think people want to hear them, reach out to Trina and I. This is our UXPA MN programs email address. Both Trina and I have access to this. Feel free to reach out, start conversations. We're always looking for speakers. We're always looking to widen our knowledge on things. So feel free to send us an email and let us know if you would like to be a speaker. Next. As user experience folks, we know how important input and data are. So we're doing a survey. UXPA is, again, like I said, run entirely by volunteers. We listen to what we hear from people in chat, in virtual events, in-person events, and we really try to tailor the content to be something that's beneficial for our members. And so we're going to send out a survey just to gather information on what types of things you would like to hear about, what kinds of events you would like to have, so that we can make sure that we're putting our efforts towards those things that members find valuable. So please fill out the survey when it comes. It should be fairly quick, and in the end, it's to help out you. So please do it. All right, next. Sponsors. We are funded mostly by sponsors and events. So we are always looking for sponsors to either fully sponsor and host events, or to become long-term sponsors of UXPA as a whole. If you have questions, you want to sponsor, you have a company that you think would like to sponsor, there's that email address again. Feel free to reach out to us and let us know. Next. Speaking of sponsors, Horizontal Talent is one of our sponsors. They are a premier partner in being where diverse talent is, leveraging the best technology in the industry to remove bias and find the best talent and careers. So thank you to them for being a sponsor. And our other sponsor, next, is Ham Interactive. They are a niche UX staffing and recruiting firm that is in Minnesota. They've been helping companies ranging from small agencies to Fortune 50 build their UX design teams and execute on projects since they opened their doors in 2010. So thank you to Ham Interactive as well. And now you can stop listening to me and hear from some experts. Here are our panel of experts: Kahlil Brewington, Amy Mills, Siri Preston, and Simon Shamoun. Simon, we did not discuss the pronunciation of your name, and I hope I did close. Um, these folks are amazing and have a wealth of knowledge and are very humble. If you ask any of them, they will probably tell you that they don't feel like they're an expert or they don't know. But I know that they are, in having interacted with them and having worked with some of them in my past career. So they are an amazing group of folks with an amazing wealth of knowledge and always contributing to the community, whether it's public speaking, doing education engagements, or anything like that. So we're really excited to have them. We are going to start with Kahlil. What we asked the panelists to do to get started is an introduction of themselves and for them to discuss what their favorite project is, or one of the projects that they're most proud of, so you can kind of get a feel for their work. So Kahlil, you are going to kick us off.
Yay. Thank you, Crystal. Hello, I am Kahlil Brewington, uh, the owner of a fairly new agency called Queens Kings. We primarily do a lot of branding and UX and UI interface design, but I've done it all. So I've done everything from billboards to products, apps and websites and all that stuff. My favorite project that I've worked on is a project called Sammy. It is a banking app. It was a peer-to-peer and remote worker and why can't I think of it? Digital nomad banking app to get paid on those invoices faster. As some of you might know, working freelance, you get those you get those net 30, those net 90s, those net 120s, and you're like, man, I just want to get paid. Like, I just want to get paid today when I invoice somebody. So this was a way to get paid a bit faster, just digitally get that thing, get it on a debit card, and so on and so forth. So it was one of my favorite projects. That is some of the visuals from that project. Um, as mentioned, I am primarily a visual designer that kind of found his way into UX and the product world, just kind of by mistake, really. I mean, I think that's where the industry was going at some point. And as a graphic designer, like if you want to continue to make money, you have to flex a little bit. You got to bend. So went right into the UX world, which quite frankly benefits that design skill tremendously. It allows you to be able to still use that visual design stuff in a way that, you know, still brings people in, is captivating, compelling, but then bringing in the research and data to help make sure that we're doing the right things for people to use this product in a way that makes it fun and enjoyable.
Beautiful. Thanks, Kahlil. Amy, you're up next.
Hey everybody, I'm Amy Mills. I am a creative director raised in graphic design. So I've been around for, I don't know, 24 years or so in the industry here in Minneapolis in the Twin Cities. Again, started out with graphic design, so I'm definitely more of the visual UI side of the discussion tonight. But in my last role, I was able to manage and head up both the UX and the UI teams, global teams for a place called Astound Digital. So not only do I have experience with it and leading the teams, but also selling it to clients as well and being able to speak to that, as well as orchestrating and making sure those teams had everything that they needed to succeed. One of the projects I included in the next slide was one of the projects I did there at Astound Digital. And this one was rare because whereas as a leader, I didn't really get the opportunity to get my hands dirty and actually design. This one, we had some availability. So I jumped into the mix and not only was the creative director, but also the design lead in regards to UI. And so this one I had much more opportunity in to dig in and kind of flex the work that I was able to do. But this one was kind of important, and I think I'll be referencing this later on in some of the questions. there's a lot to be spoken to in this project particularly because it talks a lot about psychology. This is on my website too if you want to read more later. I'm not going to take too much time now, but um, you know, this project in particular really demanded a lot of empathy and psychology. And so what does that mean, right? I was always the person in the room reminding the team, we never know who's going to be looking at this site. We could have somebody old who is, you know, looking for cremation services for a loved one, and maybe their site isn't so great. So visually UX, UI needs to be clear, needs to be easy. It also, you know, we could have somebody with blurry vision because they're in the stages of grief, right? We need this to feel warm. We need it to feel comforting. That's why you'll see a lot of visuals of hands, you know, zoomed up micro images, organic imagery, hand-drawn imagery. Or we could have somebody feel really empowered that they're on this site planning for their future. But this project in particular really just demanded a lot of psychology behind it and making sure that the whole thing felt warm, safe, trusted. And so again, if you want to read more about it, it's on my website, Amy Mills Design, but I'll probably be referencing this a little bit more later in some of the questions.
Great, thanks, Amy. Siri, you're next.
Hey folks, my name is Siri Preston, and I'm a lead product designer at Target currently. And this is really long, and I should have definitely written this very differently for me to be able to easily read and speak to it. But like front and center, I'm a product designer, but I have background in mentorship and leadership roles, as well as most recently, prior to going back to Target, I was working at Prime Digital Academy as the head of UX programming there. And that's actually how I got connected with Trina for tonight. She was one of my students going through that program. I also am a byproduct of a UX bootcamp that I went through back in 2016 and totally believe in the transformative power of focused education. And so I do a lot to try and help budding UXers find their success in the field. Like I said, I'm currently at Target. I'm leading design on features and functionality that will impact how people shop in store. My feature is currently live. It also happens to be my favorite project and one I can't really talk about that much beyond what's currently live. But it's letting me learn some new things about service design, which I haven't had an opportunity of doing much in my career up until this point. And so it is activating all aspects of my brain. But next time you're in a Target store, open up your Target app and tap that navigate this store button, and you'll see our MVP in-store shopping tool, and you'll get to play around with that. And that is the area that I'm focused on at Target at the moment, designing across iOS, Android, and working on an implementation of this for web as well. So that's me.
Great. Thank you. Simon, you're next.
Wonderful. Yeah, so my name is Simon Shamoun. My slides were clearly made out of PowerPoint because I'm more of a researcher, so I'm not so much on the design side. So I'm so glad that y'all come from that background because I can't speak too much to the all the kind of design and element side of things. So my background is actually I have a bachelor's of science in cognitive psychology and a minor in product design with a master's in human factors and ergonomics. And so, you know, human factors is really kind of the study of how people interact with systems, technologies, and products, right? And so a lot of times I spend my time kind of understanding what that relationship is like, spending a lot of time kind of interviewing and doing human subject testing, usability testing, and, you know, providing kind of that understanding of, okay, from beginning to end, what is it that we're actually asking people to do? Can they actually do it? What does that performance look like? And so on. And so I actually started out my career at NASA. So I was a former NASA engineer and I got to work on the Lunar Space Station, which is probably the coolest project I'll ever get to work on in my career. And so, you know, when you're building a space station, you build it into like pieces like a Lego set. And so I got to work on one of the modules, which was called Halo, or otherwise known as the Habitations and Logistics Outpost. And so essentially what my job was when I got onto this project was, okay, here is like 1,000 pages of what we think we need astronauts to do on the space station. It's all written on paper. Now figure out what we need to do for them. What kind of products do we need to make? What do the tasks look like? Where can people make mistakes? How do we make it so that they don't do those mistakes and that it's safe and effective? And so I started that out at 10% engineering readiness, going all the way to 90. And so since then, I've kind of transitioned as being a independent consultant, and I've now kind of mostly worked in the medical space when it comes to like clients like Medtronic or Abbott. So if you have any research questions, if you have any kind of like quality or safety related stuff, feel free to ask at any time. And the last piece I'll say is that I'm also an adjunct lecturer at the University of Minnesota teaching creative design or creative service design. So been a lot of fun so far. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Selfishly, I feel like 6 degrees, I'm like, I know an astronaut now, or like I have some sort of association with NASA because I'm here and I'm really excited and grateful for that because it's usually just me and the bunnies here in my office. So thank you for making my life better. So that's the last slide, right? I know that not everybody wants to just stare at slides. We're here to see faces and talk to people. So it's time for us to start asking questions. The first question I'm going to open up to all of our panelists, not that everyone has to answer it, but if you've got a good answer that you want to say, let's hear it. The first question is related to career development. What advice would you give to someone that's early in their professional career that's aspiring to grow into a leadership role?
Yeah, I don't mind starting this off. I'll try to keep it short. I think before I even go down that path of discussing leadership, I always like to talk to somebody about what leadership means to people. And if they're aspiring to be leadership, what does leadership mean to them? Do they want to be a leader because they want to make more money or they want a title or for status, right? Like that climbing the ladder that we're all taught and we're conditioned that is supposed to be successful, right? Or do they have a desire to have their voice be louder, to manage other people and help build other people's careers, to help a agency or their business thrive, right? And dependent on where they answer there is what the conversations turn out to be. Second-handedly, I think it's really important when I have these kind of conversations to let people know what behind the curtain really looks like with leadership, that the reality is what we all go into here, the creative side of it, that we love, that drove us to learn this in the first place, often is no longer the things we get to do. What it gets replaced with most of the time is managing people, being the person that people go to with problems, right? Having to be the person that has really tough conversations with people about benefits and XYZ, hard things of the business, right? And so just letting them know that the reality that leadership isn't necessarily glamorous. It's a tough thing to do, and you're ultimately responsible for people on a team and their mental health and their career growth. And depending on where they kind of answer that, that's where the conversations go to. But I think it's really important to understand that the motive there first and get that out of the way so they decide. At the end of the day, once people realize that what leadership could actually be, right? It's okay to not take that step. A career isn't successful if you don't become a leader. That doesn't mean you can't absolutely kill it with your career. You don't have to manage people to kill it in your career. Saying, you know what, I don't want to manage people. I don't want to be responsible for that. And that's okay. 100% awesome and cool. But that's why I like to kind of build that groundwork, because the sooner you realize, is this for you or is it not, the better. And both answers are perfect.
Yeah, building off of what you're saying there, Amy, I always give the advice of observing the people that you do admire as leaders and trying to understand, like, what is it about their leadership style that makes you admire them? And like what, because usually like when you want to become a leader, it's because there's someone around you that's just so kick-ass as a leader that you want to be like them one day. And what is it about them? but then going one step beyond that and talking to them about their journey and how they show up as a leader and what their job is like, just like you would do for any career change. You go talk to people that have that job and be like, what is it like? And so like Amy, like you hit on all of the things perfectly. I like to treat everything like a UX problem. And if I was gonna make a solution for myself, if like leadership was my goal, I'd start with research and doing discovery. And that starts with observation and conversation. And so like if there's someone in your corner that you are just like, I love everything about you as a leader, go talk to them and like get curious. It's okay to talk to people about your dreams, because otherwise they'll just remain dreams if you don't talk to someone about it and start getting curious.
Great.
Yeah.
Good, Simon.
The one thing I was just going to add was one thing I did find out, I think a little bit later in my career than I was hoping to was, sometimes to be a leader, you don't necessarily need permission to do it. And that might sound a little strange, but when I think about leaders and kind of what they're doing and what their qualities are, oftentimes it's like people who have integrity, someone who you can really trust, who's an expert in their field, who kind of creates a very warm and open environment, and is able to communicate very well. And a lot of these characteristics doesn't necessarily need to be attached to a title. It just tends to be because when you have a manager, let's say, who is a great leader, it's an amazing feeling. Or if you have someone at that director who can do that stuff, it makes a world of a difference. But just because you're not a manager or you're not a director or at that kind of, higher levels doesn't necessarily mean that you can't be a leader. I will say though, it does take time to develop it because you're essentially building trust. And trust kind of comes with, building relationships and being able to deliver excellent quality work all the time. But it will come. And so you don't need permission to do that. You could do that today if you would like. But I didn't realize that until later on. And also sometimes I even found myself being impatient, but trust the process. It'll come. That's what I would add.
Yeah, all of that stuff. Oh my God, like everybody answered that question perfectly. I honestly have nothing to add other than ditto, ditto, ditto. Yeah, everything that everybody said there. Fantastic.
Perfect answers. Okay. The next question is about collaboration, and Simon is going to answer this one. It is, what advice do you have for bridging the gap between business goals and user needs?
Oh yeah. So uh, my advice, or at least my method of how I've done this is, we've always kind of applied the human-centered design process or the design process to, our user needs and to our customers and so on. And that has, generated great insights, and, helps us lead to making great decisions. I would say that you could take that same method and essentially apply it also to the business side of it. They are users as well. And what I found is that if you apply those methods in the same manner with stakeholders or folks who are developing these goals, you can most of the time find some type of middle ground. But a lot of times it's not very obvious at first. So to give an example, my current client right now is Abbott Laboratories for electrophysiology. And so they basically create products for physicians who do heart surgery. And Abbott is trying to catch up with one of its competitors. And so their business goal is, okay, we need to get more market shares back, right? And then when talking to actual users, their user needs are like, this thing is way too complicated. It takes way too long to do things. I don't understand where to find stuff. And so, these two things are a little bit different. And funny enough, the business goals, their solution to getting more market shares was more features. And so this is like completely contradicting. One is saying I want less, one says I want more, right? But by applying, kind of that design process, kind of digging into it a little bit more with the business, it's like, okay, well, getting more features is kind of seems more of like a symptom So what is really the problem when it comes to like, why are we not getting market shares? What is features actually solving? What is it actually doing? And as you kind of start digging, you can kind of start figuring out, gaps in that process. And then, as you start doing that, then you could start finding out, okay, well, what really is the problem? And talking to the users and figuring out, okay, is there a way that we can get market shares, but, maybe a different pathway? And so, through this kind of exercise, I was able to kind of do a research and technology project, kind of like an early development type of project. And we found out that physicians are buying the competitors' products because it takes about half the time to do the same task with Avid as it does for the competitor. So it's taking double the amount of time. And so we're like, okay, well, if you could do the same task at the same amount of time, would that influence your purchasing? And the answer is overwhelmingly yes, right? And then it's like, okay, well, let's start doing the work to start figuring it out. And so then that's kind of a way I was able to apply kind of that design process to the business goals and the needs, and to get to middle ground, which was basically, let's make it less complicated, make it easier for them to do their task, and we will get shares back, and we will satisfy both the business need as well as this, which, of course, the initial need was more features. Now it's something different, but we wouldn't have known that hadn't we not kind of done that process. So that's what I would say is take the design process. Don't only just apply it to your users. You could also apply it to your stakeholders and the folks who are creating those business goals.
Really important points, I think, especially when you pair that with the last conversation, right, about being in leadership. Part of being in leadership is understanding how to speak in business goals and manage up to a board, to a C-suite, to an executive team. And it's really difficult to do that in strictly UX and UI terminology, right? You have to understand how it meets a goal or how it gets, the company as an overall to achieve a goal. So really, really beneficial. Next question is in community impact. So how do you advocate for the value of UX, CX, UI, any other letters you want to include in there? Organizations that are still maturing in their design practices. So how do you get these organizations to understand the value that is brought to the table? And we are going to start with Kahlil.
Yeah, thanks, Crystal. Kind of on the same note of what Simon, left that last question with, there's a lot of education that needs to come into play with that, sharing that information with, cross-platform teams, just with everybody, to be honest with you, sharing it even with HR and everybody to see what is happening, what's changing, what's going to be going on. I think bringing in everybody, collaborating more often, communicating as frequently as possible, and really making sure that there is an understanding of the direction that you're trying to go on that. I know a lot of clients don't have time for that stuff, or they say they don't have time for that stuff. That there's other ways to share that information. It doesn't have to be a share out where we just, sit there and go through 3 hours of data and they don't understand how to do it. How can we parse that information into ways that they can, digest and understand what the value of that is, why they've invested all this time and effort into that, what that stuff is going to do for that product, what that data is going to do for the end result. If there's some stuff that we can share with them, I think there's a lot more benefit for the community to understand it. And then there's a lot more buy-in as well. Like we are doing some really impactful stuff that's helping the community or blah, 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 blah. There's a bigger understanding. The salespeople understand what we're doing instead of just being like, we make web stuff. They're like, no, we understand the product is a medical product. It does this, it helps this, it helps. They really understand the things that we're trying to solve, and they can better, serve everyone. So I think those are really the pillars of UX and CX and UI and all the other the letters in that alphabet as well are, really communication and sharing that information and sharing it often, right? Like when you have that information, hey, we discovered this. Don't wait till the synthesis. Don't wait till it's all broken down. Like, we understand this right now. We can affect this today. Let's do it, and show them why and whatnot. But yeah.
Perfect. Amy, do you want to answer this one next?
Yeah, absolutely. So I look at this question kind of two-part, which is obviously we're all going to start nodding our heads, data and metrics, right? At the end of the day, whether we're talking to creatives or we're not talking to creatives, it all comes down to data and metrics, right? And as somebody that comes from the visual side, that's important, right? Because creatives, I can talk to creatives all day and they get what I'm talking about. Most of the times we're not talking, whether it's internal teams or clients. How do you convince a client that knows nothing about appreciation about aesthetic and visual design? Especially, we're not going to go down the AI path, but especially these days where everybody thinks if they know Canva, right, or AI, they can just do it their darn self, right? Like, so how do we convince it? Through data and metrics, showing side by side comparisons. This is what your website was, this is what it is now, or, a user story, right? Of showing how those metrics, retention, conversion, all that good stuff just soared, and why that is, educating them of what the details are behind it, of not only does this just look better, which we all know is better a million times over, but why it's better and why it's making less friction on the site, um, minimizes mental effort, all that stuff. And the second side of this, when I'm trying to sell creative, right, is trying to explain the efficiency of the process, right? If you're going to try to take this on yourself, whether it's hiring freelance or trying to do it yourself with AI or whatever means, right? You're going to spin, you're not going to have structure behind it. You bring in the professionals to have process, timelines to kick this stuff out like clockwork, like it's supposed to be done because we're on it and we know what process we're doing. And at the end of the day, what does that come down to? Time and money. And I find that's all what people care about if it all comes down to money. So again, efficiency, process, and data to back everything up.
All right. And Simon.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree with Amy. It's actually gotten to the point where I kind of stopped advocating in the sense of like what I found is that trying to when kind of explaining and trying to educate is definitely a great method, but what I've found to be uh, much more efficient is building relationships and then really starting to deliver with that data, deliver on showing how this process, this product is saving us cost, it's saving us money. We don't have to waste time doing training, we don't have to do any of this kind of weird stuff um, and really delivering on that. And once you kind of consistently keep doing it, I've found that, the the bonds that you make with the people around you and kind of the delivery of the data and the work that is very defensible, that it can stand on its own, is enough to make people start to recognize, oh yeah, Simon's providing really good work and Amy's, providing a lot of great data and all this stuff. And so you really can start to change hearts and minds once people really get to start to know you and then also start to consistently see that, you're kicking ass and that you're saving dollars and that it also is, really great of, design and the process and people start to really appreciate it. And it also, it always feels great too at the end when the user's like, oh my God, thank God you gave me this. This is amazing. This is wonderful, right? So that's what I've been starting to do because I found that to be one of the most effective ways to make it so that folks will, want to start coming to us and be like, hey, I have this question, I want to figure this out, or we're thinking about adding this type of user need, or so on. Help me out. And so if you can do that, I think you'll be in a good spot.
Great. Next question is more around kind of process and design. What is your current favorite tool, tip, or trick that you can share? And we'll start with Siri.
If anyone wanted me to talk about Figma, I'm not going to. My favorite tool is pen and paper. I start literally everything with pen and paper. And it doesn't matter if I'm like designing interfaces or I'm planning for a deck or I'm preparing for a share out or prepping notes for tonight, everything starts with pen and paper. For me, it works as like a freedom of expression kind of tool where like I'm no longer focused on things being perfect because nothing in my notebook can tell me that I am off by 2 pixels or my kerning is wrong or whatever it might be. Like my notebook can't tell me that. And so my brain is free to explore the ideas and get those things out before I start editing myself. Because, well, this is not related to UX, but I just started writing a book and I wrote the first paragraph at least 7 times before I even moved on to like write any more of it. Because I was writing it on my computer and I'm like, I think I need to write it on pen and paper because I won't edit myself so much because it's so hard to edit yourself on pen and paper, where it's really easy to do that when you're in Figma or anything. And so my like tip would be start with a tool where you're not going to edit yourself. That might be like crayons or markers or pen and paper. I would like discourage pencils. Erasing is too easy. And like let yourself like be creative without the immediate edit. So that would be my tip.
Perfect. Kahlil?
Yeah, Siri, that's great. I love that. Great way to approach that. I always say when people debate, what tool, like, oh, I want to use Figma, I want to use Sketch, I want to use, whatever. I'm like, your best tool is your brain. The first tool that you start everything with is your brain. That's where everything starts. That's where you start to break down stuff. The minute they start talking about the project, you're like, I know I should do this. It should look like this. These things are here. You start thinking about all these things, the way that stuff might start to get built. You start thinking about the questions you might ask for, the data that you want to gather. You start thinking about all that stuff before you even get that pen to paper. I always kind of leverage that for, a lot of it. Like I spend a lot of time, I meditate every morning so that I can just think about like what I got to do before I, start my entire day. So I wake up and then I just close my eyes again and just concentrate for 15 minutes and just try to just, get my brain a little bit more aligned with what I'm about to start doing for the rest of the day. And it always helps me, kind of focus on the tasks that I need to do for that day, the things that I've been kind of marinating on for a while, like where I really need to, put that energy towards. I go for a lot of walks that open up my brain and just get that same stuff. So I think that, just having that time to think about the problem that you're trying to solve, not trying to solve it by just putting boxes and stuff and be like, oh, that could look good, that could look good, that could look good. You got to kind of figure some of that stuff out in your head or on paper before you get into the pixel world. Even though I often start with an idea, if I have something like I got to get it out, like it could look like this, but I'm always going to go back to like, how does somebody get into this thing? How do they use it? Why is it this color? All these things. It has to be some rationale behind the work that we do. It can't just be like, it looks cool. Looks cool. So, definitely get into the brain, spend some time thinking and, don't be afraid to like think about weird things.
Well, you all are in my brain because you just answered basically the next question, which is how you get through creative blocks. So I'm gonna derail us because I can do that. We've got a lot of questions coming in Q&A, so I'm gonna throw in one of those questions and open it up to everyone. There are a lot of questions about collaboration, how to collaborate across UX writers, researchers. How do you navigate that collaborative process and make sure that you're heard, but that others are also heard? And then how do you do that in a way that doesn't drag the process out and take forever or introduce a little bit of political nature in the process? So whoever wants to go first.
I'm happy to while other people think. That's cool. I just reference back, I think about an opportunity that happened more than once in my last role. Again, when I was directing UX and UI, and that was, when I had a team of UX come to me and said, here's the deal. We don't feel supported by our other teammates, whether it was tech or account or whatever, right in front of the client on our meetings every single week. Client is asking tech questions. They're not stepping up. I can't answer. So creative ends up looking like they don't know what they're doing when it wasn't their responsibility, right? Perfect opportunity of like, that is showing me right there that the team, there's a crack in it, right? And, I was on every call. I could see it happening time after time again. And ultimately in that situation, it was just a matter of getting the entire team together respectfully, carefully. Nobody wants their hands slapped or feeling like, Amy's coming to lecture them, right? Or Mama Bear is telling them what to do. But ultimately, it was just an opportunity to come together and say, like, we're on the same team. Here's what I am seeing so that so-and-so doesn't feel like they were tattled, right? Here's what I'm seeing on the call. I'm seeing opportunities where the client is pushing this question and we're not getting enough voices answering. I'm seeing some resourcing issues of maybe we're not seeing the resourcing supported on those calls. Is there an issue there? What can we do? But it's just it's walking that tightrope of holding people accountable, that they need to be the voices behind their expertise, while also respecting them. And, it's really a tightrope of pushing people, holding them accountable without getting people frustrated where they don't want to then support UX and UI anymore. And ultimately, at the end of the day, everybody was heard, everybody felt supported. And the meetings in particular with that example, everybody started speaking up. And ultimately, the most important thing, client, I think, could see a difference and they felt way more confident in those meetings. But, working with other teams, sometimes you just have to really advocate and push where the boundaries are and where they should be and get that help, whether they realize it or not, that they really need to support. Creative can't do everything. We can't speak on everything. So if they're not doing it, you got to speak up and you got to ask people to do their part more. Tough conversations, but you have to do it.
I have like somewhat similar but different story. So in my current role at Target, so if you didn't know, Target's a huge company, just giant. And the UX team is around 200 plus individual contributors on the team. Which means that anytime I pick up a new project, I have at least, I don't know, 6 to 8 designers who likely have an opinion and some stake in the game on like what I'm picking up. Which can, like, we talked a little bit about politics here, but like it can be kind of like a little bit of a political game. But what I always anchor to in those moments is having clear documentation of goal and like what the outcome of the project is, so that no matter what stage the work is in, we have something to anchor back to. It's not about like this iteration of the design, but rather it's about these goals and these outcomes. It also helps me separate myself from the work too, so that when I'm getting that input from my peers and getting like cross-functional partner input from like engineers and copywriters and researchers and my product manager and their leader and the guy over here who thought it was cool, like when I get all that feedback, I can filter it through. And it helps me not be defensive, even though sometimes it's hard not to be defensive. That's because I'm a human. But it helps you filter through and like be able to take in and sit with that feedback and implement the stuff that like actually aligns really well. I try not to react to feedback the same day I get it, unless I'm under like tight deadline, so that I can have some separation from maybe the way it was delivered or how I felt in the moment, so that I can see that feedback through the lens of the project and rather than through like the emotion of getting the feedback. And then just one last thing about like pulling people in and making sure that you're still moving along the timeline, sharing your timeline and milestones up front. It's all about clear communication. They know you got to get it done sometime, but if you don't tell them when, they're going to give you opinions until you tell them to stop. And so like, I need this, like your feedback by Friday, or can you get me this by next Thursday? We're going to be starting the next sprint, whatever it might be. Clear communication is going to help with collaboration all of the time. And so Amy talked about tough conversations. Sometimes it's just being direct with what you need. Yeah.
You literally, that last point, you stole it out of my mouth, because that's what I've oftentimes found when things can get pretty intense, is the schedule ends up kind of ruling the conversation. So people may want, certain things and to be done a certain way, but the schedule is essentially the written documentation of what is actually, real and what's happening. Because we all have things in our brains and all of that stuff, but until it's written down, it doesn't really exist. And so once you have that schedule out and it's like a week long and everybody wants certain things and you're like, okay, how are we going to fit this in a week? And then, bringing other people into that conversation with, the how questions. Okay, you want to implement this. How are we going to be able to implement this type of design, when we only have like 2 days? Does that mean you're going to do it in 2 days? And, being able to work that conversation and include people, because I think once they start to see the problem for themselves and you kind of make them feel like they're involved in the decision making, process, that there's more buy-in. But of course, there are times where you do have to be the person to say, nope, we just have to go this type of way, and being honest and upfront about it. But I've always found that like once you can present the problem, give the picture and the context, and then introduce kind of that how question, and phrase it that way so people can provide their perspectives and solutions, you tend to get a lot more buy-in from other people. So.
Great. Thanks for letting me throw a bonus question in the middle of everything. I'll go back to the ones that were prepared now. Our next question is around psychological and emotional design. So how are psychological principles being applied to create more emotionally engaging user experiences in 2025? And Amy, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, I always start with Gestalt. If you don't know Gestalt theories, start there, right? It's the psychology behind human perception, that things are seen as a whole versus individual parts. That is the core. As a designer, UX or UI, you got to know that. But ultimately, that comes down to, a few pixels between chaos and calm, so if we want to talk psychology. And then the obvious things, right? Color, copywriting, tone, all of that stuff, it's the difference between something feeling uncomfortable, whether you know it or not, or something feeling confident, or something feeling threatening, right? All of that. But then, preaching to the choir, usability, right? That process, making sure something is extremely easy to navigate, lightening that mental load, to what we want somebody to do on the site, right? Personalization, how much makes you feel included, makes you feel known, and where do you draw the line between that and starting to feel creepy, right? Like, where is that line? And that's different for every project, right? Of like, where is that? Same thing with privacy, right? Where is it where it's like, hey, Target, you know me, you know everything about me, right? That feels pretty good. But is there a line where it's like, hold up, um, why do you know my dog's name, or whatever it be, right? Accessibility, inclusivity can make something feel way more comfortable too. But ultimately it just comes down to those. As a visual person, of course, I'm going to rely on way more of like Gestalt theories, color, feel, shapes, right? White space, and how that draws with psychology. But as all of you know, the experience is, if not as powerful, if not more powerful, of how we want someone to find the information and take that path that we want them to take as simply as possible. Back to the project I talked about in the very beginning of mine, that was a huge project when it came to psychology. That whole thing was about psychology. And I kept telling people all the time, we want to always make sure that we are warm, welcoming, and people are going to take different paths, but we want it to be as simply warm and comfortable as we possibly can for this type of website, right? And so making sure that information was there, easy to find, through a quite complex website. But there again, make sure that we get them where they want to go as easy as possible. and draw that line between all of those other factors that I brought up.
Great. And Simon.
Yeah. So Amy, I think covered really well kind of the visuals and the graphics aspect of it. What comes to my mind when I think about like psychology principles that I kind of see in the day-to-day that I've applied is kind of this idea of how, people make judgments and how they make decisions. And humans are incredibly terrible at making what they call in psychology absolute judgments, which is this idea that if someone walks into a room and you were to ask them how tall are they down to, the feet in the inch, they're going to get it wrong like 99% of the time, right? But then if you have two people walk into the same room and say which one is taller, it's almost immediately like with ridiculous accuracy that people can be able to tell, right? And so absolute judgment is something that that people tend to be really, really bad at, but comparison judgment we're really, really good at, right? And so a lot of times when we talk about like various types of designs or kind of introducing this type of experience, I've oftentimes found that if you can give that comparison assessment to people, where they're able to communicate better, kind of what they're feeling, kind of what, what kind of comes to their mind, what are things that they like and they don't like, you're able to at least provide, different types of options for other people because, if it's just one thing, it's kind of can be really difficult to give feedback where it's like, oh, I just don't like it. It's where like if it's something else, it's like, well, I like this compared to that because of X, Y, and Z. And so really I've always found that like, that type of psychology principle of just like comparison judgment that we are really, really good at and really keep, leveraging that at every step of the design process is going to only make it your life a lot easier. It's also going to present options because people like options rather than just saying, take this and run with it. So like, I know our last question was like, how do you collaborate well with other people? And sometimes it's a easier discussion when you go, here are three options. This is what we got to go with. Pick one, right? Or, what tends to happen is out of those three options, you get a fourth option, right? Something kind of mends and then something else is born. And so we're really good at that. And so really leveraging that kind of, throughout your design process, throughout your research, you name it, I think will just only make it a better experience, way more engaging, and then kind of really be able to tap into that emotional aspect as well. So.
That's a great point. We've talked about leadership. We've talked about how to communicate up, right, to executive level. Comparison is ideal. I'm sure everyone here and everyone on the call has experience going, do you like this? And someone's like, I don't know, I'm not sure. But if you say, do you like A or B? There's a definite answer. So that's great. Next, we're going to talk about some trends, right? 2025, we're getting started. We want to know what we need to know for the year, what's going on. So the question is, what do you see as the biggest challenges facing UX, CX, and UI professionals in 2025, and how do you recommend overcoming them? And we're going to start with Siri.
I knew you were going to start with me. Predicting the future, definitely a side hobby of mine. Let's see. So 2025, things that are top of mind for me is like really all I can speak to because I have no idea what's going to happen this year. But things that I've been encountering in my work and I think will continue to be trends throughout the next year are the speed of the work. People are looking to move quickly. So I work in the e-commerce space, which is highly competitive. And speed to market with new tools and functionality and all of that is like kind of make or break it at this point, especially because of like the moment there's friction in the process, someone will go somewhere else where they know it's easier. I'm sure all of you can think of an example where you hit a website and you were trying to buy something and it was too hard and so you went to Amazon. I'm sure you all can, that just example is universal. And so there's the speed of the work so that like stuff gets out quickly so you can stay ahead of your competition. The competition is steep. And then there's also this looming fear of AI from like a design perspective. And that's the one I actually really want to speak to more broadly because the other two are like kind of always there, but it just feels like more amped this year for some reason. But the fear of AI, I like the way I am dealing with that existential crisis is anchoring to like, what is it about me that makes me uniquely qualified for any job? I can tell you right now, it's not because I know how to use Figma. It's not because I know how to use Miro. It's not even because I know how to design interfaces for an app. It's because I know how to solve problems. I know how to identify them. I also don't know how to like understand why they're important to solve. And then I'm creative, and so I can think of ways that we might solve them. And so like those things are like unique to me. Like they're skills that I possess that a computer doesn't even need to exist for me to be able to do. And so I anchor to that, where like those skills are things that people can't take away from me, and they're like in really high demand across a ton of fields. And so when I get into that existential AI is coming for my job space, I anchor to what is true about myself. And like and then I knit, honestly. I think like good healthy balance and separation between like work and who you are as an individual. I was gonna save this for later, but like you are not your work. Your work is an expression of some of the stuff inside of you, but you are not your work. And like if that's not on your wall, I don't know, write it on your wall. You have so much value, and your work is just one thing that you do. So, which can be really cool. But yeah, that's how I'm dealing with my existential dread.
Thank you for saying that. I think it's very important with layoffs and everything that's happening to get wound up in the thought that how a company treated you is who you are, and it defines your entire life, and it doesn't. So thank you. I'm going to kind of transition into the next question, which is related. And again, it's dealing with trends for 2025. How can professionals prepare to stay ahead, right? To make sure that they're gaining the knowledge they need and they're staying ahead of where the trends are going. And I know no one knows exactly what's going to happen, but in your professional opinion, what do you think? We are going to start with Kahlil.
Keep learning. Don't stagnate. If you're afraid of AI, stop. Embrace it. It's not going away. It's your friend. It will make your life so much easier if you're not using it. Like, trust me. I know that's a whole nother, topic, but it is like, I think all of us like kind of itching to talk about it a little bit, but but it's not going away, right? It's part of our routine. But yeah, keep learning. Always be learning in this field. Always be listening. Always be looking at market trends, what's changing, where things are going. Design trends, what's going on in UX and UI, and that stuff like changes like by the hour, right? Like there's no way to really predict any of that stuff. And so I think it's like stay aware, pay attention to what's going on out there, follow, influencers that you like to, that you like their stuff, you like their content, learn as much stuff as you can. Figma's a great tool, but there's so many other tools out there. I heard somebody say something about Canva and it being like, whatever. I've never used it, but I think Canva's great. If Canva opens up the world for people to understand the work that we do, they're never going to be able to do it as good as we do, hopefully. Like, hopefully that's the thing. But if it opens up the world for people to understand this stuff and do it and have their own ways of expressing themselves, that's great. That's awesome. I think that's a really good thing. It makes our stuff a bit easier to understand for people down the road, right? People understand the patterns that we're doing. They understand why we maybe made these decisions, or they respond to them in a different way because they've been able to create some of that stuff and play around with it and understand it. I know there's a lot of like master's degree folks in the chat and stuff like that. And so like there's so many tools out there. And I know like those master's degrees programs have you like focused on, learning processes and stuff like that. And you might not be learning the tools. Don't be afraid of it. So there's so much crap to learn. Just keep learning, learn. Eat it all. And then you'll figure out what you like and what you don't like.
Don't put yourself in a box, right? I get it. And I
Never,
use
never.
Canva for nonprofits, right? I mean, they can't afford fancy tools. It's all they
Yep.
have. So
Yep.
you got to work with what you
Yep.
got.
If you want to stay relevant in this business, you have to stay up on whatever's going on. It's the only way. I'm old and I've been doing this stuff for a long time. and thankfully I still get work.
All right, Simon.
I was so into to the rant. I forgot what was the question again. I was
How do
just
you how do you
it was
stay
so
ahead
quick.
of what's coming and the trends and stay sort of
Yeah,
relevant and ahead of things?
yeah. I don't know if this is really a trend in 2025, but perhaps something that might be a trend that's different between us and our parents. So one thing, I had a discussion with McLean, who's the user experience director from the University of Minnesota, and he kind of pointed that out to me where, this idea of staying in one job, doing one thing for the rest of your life is something probably of the past. We are probably going to be doing a lot of different stuff throughout our lifetime, and that's okay. Having the nice thing about being a designer is that you have this massive toolbox, and you can really apply this to different types of problems. And like Siri said, it's like we solve problems, right? And that can look in a lot of different types of ways. It can look like a lot of different types of opportunities. And so, being perhaps like attached to this idea of like, you're just going to be a UX designer for your entire career, right? Like, yeah, it could be possible. And I really hope if that's what you want, I really hope that you get there, right? But I've started to notice that, a lot of folks might go from, UX maybe to product management or start diving into different types of areas, or maybe you're a product designer and now you're in UX. And so this idea of like, being able to be flexible and not necessarily being so perhaps attached to, this specific title, that you could start really blending into different types of stuff. And that's only just amplified with the fact that, they're now trying to integrate, since we've talked about AI, they're trying to integrate AI into everything. And so the gap of being able to do certain functions is starting to get smaller. So like I still remember when I was getting my minor in product design, the idea of cropping out a certain section in Photoshop and filling the back end of it or the background was like the hallmark, at least in my mind, of like, you know what you're doing, you're a designer. I was like, I don't know how to do this. Like, there's no way to do it. Now it's like you click on it, you show up a prompt, and you're like, get rid of this person, right? So that gap is now incredibly shrink. And so, like, yes, it is very scary for AI. I'm sure we'll have more discussions about that. But at least, some of the trends that I'm seeing and some of the stuff that you could use to leverage yourself is that, uh, you have an opportunity to really explore. You have an opportunity to really try different areas. And it's okay because again, we're really our main thing is really solving problems, and whatever that looks like and whatever shape or form it takes, will be different. I never thought I would get to work on a space station ever in my life, but I got that opportunity. And then I went from that to like medical products. It's like you never know what life is going to take you. And so just being open, being flexible, um, can really be a good and helpful thing. And might start becoming the norm in the future. But who knows? So
Perfect. I love that example because cropping things out of photos, and I think to the sentiment of everybody, right? Like you got to roll with it. You got to go where things are going. As a creative person, I hated that, right? Cutting out hair on a busy background was the worst thing ever. And now that the robots can do it, I'm like mad that that they're taking my role, except I never wanted to do that, right? So let those kinds of things be automated, let them go, let that process go, move on to Siri's point earlier, move on to the things that you know that you're good at and where you can focus your energy, right? Just roll with it. I'm going to throw in a question from the Q&A, so open to anyone that wants to answer it. The question is, given the current realities of layoffs and the corporate world and UX and what careers look like, what do you do to stay motivated and to make sure that you're in your role, and maybe if you decide it's time to look for a new role, right? Like, how do you kind of navigate all of that?
I am happy to answer this question because I've been through layoffs I don't even want to say it, but yeah. because of my skill set, visual designer kind of guy coming in, we solve problems pretty quick, right? And so they're like, hey, you know what? Let's get rid of those people. They're charging us a lot of money to do this stuff. And so layoffs happen pretty quickly when you kind of focus on the UI side of things for some reason, because like it's pretty, once you've got a design system locked in, you're like, there you go. You don't really need us to build. We want colorful wireframes, guys. What do you want? So it's pretty straightforward. What I do to stay motivated is I just jump right back into freelance work. I just start looking for projects that I know are going to fulfill me in ways that are not financial. Yes, you can get more money in doing freelance. You can find 10 clients and charge them all $10,000 and be good, right? But you're also going to be freaking out, just like you were at the agency that you were working at. So take a minute when you get laid off, take a breather. If you've got a little stability, I know how tough it can be. But take a minute to just figure out, those things you want to do. I've recently just been, you know, any work that I want to do, instead of being like, I'm interested in that position, I'm interested in that role, I've just been saying like, hey, let's talk. Let's have a chat before I say I'm interested in something. And that way we can find out if there is a vibe. You have something that could fit me? Great. Let's hang out and talk more about that. Or I'm interested and maybe I think I could help you with that specific thing that you're talking about. And then there's a little bit more of an understanding of where I could fit in, instead of just being like, yep, we found somebody. Now you got to go through the 6 interview process and whatever. And it just, you don't even end up getting the job because you didn't really meet any criteria. You didn't like anybody in the first things, but now you've overstepped a bunch of things just by having an informational interview and trying to figure out where you fit. So there's some new ways that I've just been trying to just kind of flex in that space. But like I said, I've been through a lot of layoffs, so it's very comfortable to me. And just I think, don't be afraid of freelance. Don't be afraid to do things that are outside your comfort zone. Don't be afraid to go down to the clinic down the street that has really bad signage and be like, hey, you know what? I think I can help you. I think I can help you put together some stuff that gets you more clientele or whatever that is. Your website's terrible. I think I can help you. There's tons of ways to get into that stuff that will fulfill you. And maybe you can start your own business and maybe you can do your own thing and not even have to worry about somebody laying you off. Hopeful, right?
Anyone else?
I'd be
Okay.
happy to. Oh, go ahead, Amy.
No, go ahead, Siri. Go for it.
I can speak to the question, the part of the question that you asked about, like when you're like, if you have a role and you're looking for like what's next, like that is the most comfortable place to be, is when you know that the role you're in isn't what you want, but you know there's something else out there that you do, because then you have the stability of a role and the opportunity to look for something new. And I recognize like looking for a new job is like a full-time job. I just recently went through this. I returned to Target back in August. And when I'm a little later in my career, but when I'm looking, I start with why. Why am I looking for a new job? And that can even be coming out of a layoff. Like, why do you want to work? What is work to you? Is it stability? Is it flexibility? Is it something that allows you to do the hobbies that you really enjoy? And once I have that why, then I start like thinking about, okay, well, what might get me that why? And then once I know what might give me that why, then I talk about like who has that I could talk to within my network, or maybe like my network's network. And just like Kahlil was saying, like it's having those lightweight conversations where you can kind of like get a vibe check from employers, from different role types, from different companies, in order to like help you narrow your search. Because I will tell you, applying to like 150 jobs and not understanding why you're applying to 150 jobs is not going to get you a job out of 150 jobs. Now, I know that there's some people on here that are really early in their career, likely, and you likely are applying to like 150 jobs, but you have a why. And that why is that you want experience, you want mentorship, you want opportunity to grow and learn. Almost any job can get you that. It may not be your dream job, but that why still exists there, right? For me, if I applied to 150 jobs, many of them would not check my why box. So like, I mean, I said it earlier, but I approach every problem like it's a UX problem. And I'm like, who, what, where, when, why? If I can answer those questions, now I've got a targeted solution in front of me that I can go after. The motivation piece, it's about giving yourself grace. You're not gonna be able to show up with 100% every day. I mean, I don't show up with 100% every day to my job that someone pays me for, you know? Sometimes the best you can do is 30%, but you are showing up with your 30% self and you are still there. And the same goes with the job search. Like not every day is gonna be a home run. Maybe today you only feel like you can send out 2 follow-up emails and you just don't feel like you can do anything else. And like, that's okay. Give yourself grace in that. It's hard work looking for that next opportunity.
Yeah, just to add to that real quick, Amy, sorry to cut in, but just, if you are having struggles with that, like just find, carve out 2 hours a day just to look for jobs and that's it. And then cut it short, and that way you're only looking at jobs that you really want to apply to. You're not just like, oh, that one looks good, that one looks good, that one looks good. You're just carving out those 5, 6 jobs that you really want, that you can craft a good letter for, and you can put your resume together properly, and it's really specific to that job. So, take that time to really just, focus for a little bit. Doesn't have to be all day. Don't turn it into a job.
Yeah, I'll say 2 seconds and then we can move on. I think Siri, you kind of captured everything I wanted to say between you and Kahlil. But ultimately when you are, and this is how I kind of took that question too, sitting in your seat, right? 9 to 5, you're hating it, you want to be somewhere else, right? And how do you do your job 9 to 5? When you're hating what you're doing right now. I just find there's so much confidence when you know that behind the scenes, you've got yourself covered, right? Your website is online, it's kicking. You don't have a to-do list to get that thing ready to go. Right now, it's live, it's awesome, it's representing you, right? And so, making sure that on your off time, you get that website just cranking awesome, perfect. So when you're sitting there in your 9 to 5 and you're hating it and you're terrible and you're despising XYZ, you know that you don't have this big laundry list of things to do to take those steps, those next steps to make that stuff happen. I personally love tinkering with my site, and it does give me a lot of confidence, and it gives me a lot of reminders of what I do and what I feel confident about. So really pour yourself into your site. Let it really shine with who you are and what you provide, kind of like what Siri said earlier. What do you provide that's different from everybody else? If you have that going in the background, I find it helps with the day-to-day when that job just becomes kind of sucky.
Great. Couple highlights from what everyone just said. An interview process is you interviewing the company as well, right? Ask questions, feel like if it's whether or not it's a company that you want to work for, if they're your people and people that you think you could collaborate with, that's really important. And I think the other big thing when I talk about passion and how to reinvigorate your passion is surround yourself with other people that are passionate about it too. I think that's why, shameless plug, UXPA and other organizations are good, right? Because you can go to events and surround yourself with like-minded folks. And if you're really, really junior in your career and just getting started, or maybe still in school, there are a lot of mentorship programs you can join. If you want something that's a little bit more structured and organized, or there are so many people that are amazing in the community that if you just reach out to them, I can't tell you how many presidents and C-suite executives I've reached out and been like, hey, can we have a conversation? I just want to know like how you got to where you are in your career and just want to have a chat. There are a lot of people that are more than willing to help have conversations and help people out. All right, back to our questions. I'm going to pull another question from the Q&A. How do you see the current state of the UX job market? For the past 3 years, industry professionals have predicted improvement, yet it seems like many companies still aren't filling roles and there's still sort of layoffs happening. What's your perspective on the disconnect between what's being said that UX roles, UI roles are up and coming and they're going to be really more posting and more hiring versus what you're actually seeing in market? I know it's a tough question, but does anyone want to answer it?
I can try to answer it. I know the market is crappy. It sucks. It really does suck right now. And I I don't know I don't really know why. It to be 100% honest. My guess is that a lot of places just don't understand the importance of it. They say that they do. They're like, "Oh, user-centered design." They always talk about it, but they don't understand like what that really means. They think that just because they did some user testing like 10 years ago that that data is still relevant. I don't know, and because quite frankly, we get paid pretty well for the work that we do. I'm sure there's a lot of money involved in that. And so they're like, well, that's a big chunk of money. When we could just be like, well, what's so and so doing? Let's just copy what that company's doing. And they don't really think about their end user. Like, I think one of the questions that we had earlier was like, how do we tie business strategy in with user needs? They're the same thing. They're the same thing, right? User needs are your business strategy. If you don't have happy users, your business strategy is garbage. Doesn't matter, And so having something that just looks like everybody else but doesn't really serve your users, it's lacking. And so people are gonna not use your product. They're probably gonna like fall off and go to the one that's doing it right. And so I think there's a lack of understanding of what really that value is that we do. So again, it comes back to that education, even though it's a pain in the ass sometimes to have to educate people that have been, I've been running this project for 15 years. I'm an entrepreneur, but they still don't understand the importance of the experience design side of it, like what that end user really needs to do. And so, like I said, I don't really know what the issues are. I think it is that there's just like that lack of really like true understanding of the value of it, but I'm not sure why, because it seems that we've all been able to demonstrate the value of the work that we've been able to do throughout our careers. We have jobs and careers within this stuff for so long. And so there is tons of that, but perhaps UX is, not UX, AI is taking over a lot of that work because quite frankly, a lot of product design has become commonplace. It's templatized, it's very similar to like opening a book. Book design is not different. It's the same every time, And so we're getting that way with products to a degree, which is kind of nice, utilitarian and all that, but it also kind of like takes away that individual experience, that kind of privacy invasion that we secretly want, but we also don't want. So I don't really know what the answer is to this beautiful question that's so impossible to answer. But I just say as practitioners of this stuff, the best thing that we can do is stay up on it and keep doing it and try to outbeat the machines. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
Thanks
I
for
was
the
just
share.
gonna chime in and say, I think one important thing that I think we all know, but it's good to hear consistently is that the world is just increasingly becoming more complicated, and it will just continue to do that. And that means that no one will have an idea really of kind of what's going on because it's not possible to be able to juggle all of these different types of complicated areas of our life, of technology, of economics and all of that stuff. There's this kind of perhaps common notion that as we learn more and research and technology develops, that we will understand more. But what I've found is that it's actually the opposite because we are starting to grow at such an exponential rate that it's becoming incredibly difficult to keep pace with. And the good news is that you're not the only one. This is everybody. So like you're not in this boat thinking everyone's got the secret ingredient and you don't. It's like no one knows what's really going on. Um, and the simplest example I could give that kind of highlights this idea is like I just had so I'm a new father and I have a 1-year-old. And so I've been learning what it's like to raise children. And I just hear these crazy stories from my mom and my mother-in-law of like Oh, we used to just have babies sit on their stomach, and it was like no big deal. No one cared. We used to do all these dangerous stuff. And, now as research has kind of developed, they basically found out, no, don't put your baby like lying on its stomach, within the first couple of months of life, because they've noticed that children essentially stop breathing, right? And so the knowledge that we developed back then and the knowledge we've developed back and now has just, essentially has made that information almost obsolete, right? It was learned at that time and it was great, but now it's like it's no longer relevant. And so, I know we've talked about this idea of like continue to keep learning, which is absolutely critical, but also, give yourself some grace here. There's no secret formula. There's no Krabby Patty recipe. Everyone is just as confused as everyone else. And it's, getting to this point where, you know, there's really nothing we could do because we're human. We're not AI. We can't process everything. There's only so much information we could take, and that's okay. Totally okay. And uncertainty definitely is not fun. It could be really, it can cause a lot of anxiety. It can really, cripple you. Um, but trying to focus on the things that you can control and what you can know about, rather than the stuff that no one knows about, can be really important. And so I know, like, when we go back to this idea with the UX jobs, and like people keep saying it's going to increase and all that stuff. Um, who knows? I mean, I wish I had the golden ball, but I think right now what you can perhaps feel between different types of companies or organizations is that everyone's pretty anxious, and so they're really nervous to buy anything right now, or they're really nervous to invest into certain stuff, and it's really difficult for people who might not be familiar with our field to want to invest dollars. And so that has nothing to do with you. It's not to do with your portfolio. It's just kind of the climate of what it is. Hopefully it will get better. I think, we've spoken, like, being a part of UXPA and like kind of getting to know folks around you, will kind of help you shelter the storm, because we're all in it. And it will get better, hopefully. But if it doesn't, at least we can get a drink. That's what I say. So, don't know if that helps at all.
It does. Thank you. It was a tough question. I, like most others, are upset that you don't have the Krabby Patty recipe, but we'll just move on from that. Another question from Q&A, open to everyone. Can you share a moment in your career where you said yes to something that you originally probably would have said no to, something that you normally wouldn't have done? And how did it change the path of your career, and what did you learn from it?
Sorry, I hate to jump in. I know I was talking a lot, but I'll be quick, I promise. Um, so I accepted that this happened to me last year, kind of around fall, which is, I got offered being an adjunct faculty member for the U of M, and to teach a class that was literally in the middle of the day from 9 to 1. And everyone would be like, dude, that's suicide. That's like literally work time. You can't do that. People are going to get really upset, and so on. And I went kind of back and forth about it, but ultimately I just said yes. I said, screw it, I'll figure it out. We'll see how it went. And I'm so glad I did it, because it's been one of the best experiences working with students. It's been one of the best kind of opportunities to keep learning, and to kind of, you know, be a part of an institution that is, more than just making money, which is nice. And so on. And so, like, yes, I did really upset people when I did do that, but I was able to kind of figure out, how can I make this work? What do I need to do to be able to make sure that it happens? And at first it was really scary, but I'm really glad that I did it. It's like, I think there's so many motivational books out there that just say yes, and then you'll figure it out later. And so that's kind of what the one example I've taken recently that I'm glad I did, and I would definitely recommend. Same slogan: just say yes, you'll figure it out later.
Anyone else? Okay.
Well, mine is basically the same as Simon's. So I don't I can't see who's on the call, but some of you might already know the story. I went to Prime because I experienced extreme burnout the last time I went through Target, and I was a manager of people during COVID and just like literally totally stretched myself to the point of breaking, and had been taking some mental health time to figure out what was next for me. And I applied to Prime as like a part-time instructor, like support role, to just be like, I'm just going to do this and like figure it out. And in my informational interview, they asked me, are you sure that you don't want to like teach full time? Did you see that we have a full-time instructor position? And I was like, yes, I saw that, but I am holding myself to this bar, and you're saying I can be at this bar, and like I'm right here though. And they ended up talking me into it, and I said yes. And it was such an incredible experience teaching for 2 years at Prime. And I learned more about my leadership style. I learned more about my own design practice and like how I show up in spaces where UX is happening than I knew about myself before showing up at Prime. The moment you have to teach someone else what you do, you know it infinitely better than you did before. And that experience was just life-changing. I mean, Prime is a very special place, was a very special place, RIP. And the opportunity to like learn and grow in a space where it's like totally safe to fail. It just makes me want to go back to school forever, because like being in an education environment is just like so awesome. You get to see people make mistakes and learn from them every day, and it's incredible. And no one's well, some people are afraid to make mistakes, but they learn to not be afraid over time, because that's how you learn. If you were perfect from the beginning, you wouldn't learn a goddamn thing. So you got to make mistakes in order to learn something. And that has changed how I like show up at work, what work means to me. And I wouldn't take back that experience for anything. So the next time you're given an oddball, like out of left field opportunity, or someone sees something in you that you don't see in yourself, say okay, or a resounding yes. Either one works fine.
That's a great point. I think, sometimes your friends, family, coworkers see you and know you more than you kind of know yourself, right? Every career opportunity I've had and progression in my career has been because somebody else saw something in me that I wasn't sure I could do. So that's really important to just say, yeah, if someone has that confidence, then you have it too. All right, I am going to go to our last prepared question. And that is, what is the most valuable lesson that you've learned in your career, and how has it shaped your approach to your work? And it's open to anyone.
I'll start. I think the biggest lesson I've ever learned was the first lesson I ever learned. And that is, Siri, you said this earlier, which is perfect. You are not your work. To detach yourself from the creative that you are creating. You are, it's not a reflection of you. It is ink on a paper. It is pixels on a screen, right? It is not you. And when you can detach yourself from that, the art of feedback, which I think is the most important thing in what we do, is listening, becomes so much stronger. Getting feedback without ego, understanding and listening to what a client or somebody on your team is saying about feedback, even when they don't even have the words to describe what they're trying to say, being able to understand that aside from yourself. Again, it's not you. It's not about ego, just trying to listen to what people are saying and then giving feedback. How are you able to give really constructive feedback to somebody where they can hear it, where it's not going to touch their ego? But the art of feedback is everything. Being able to listen without judgment, but being able to be really strong and give feedback that is really critical for somebody to hear while respecting them as a professional. Ultimately, second-handedly, the second part of this would be that always remember that what you are creating is for your client or for your job, for their success. It is not for your book. So many creatives, and I don't know if this is more a UI thing or what, right? Get so tied up in the creative and defending their work, and I'm all about defending work. I will jump in and push back left and right. but it's only because I'm trying to solve the problem of the client, right? At the end of the day, it's about them getting a pat on the back, them getting a promotion, and them getting a raise. It's about their success for the project you're doing for them. It's not for your book. If you ultimately love a project and it gets destroyed by a client and the end result is not anything like you like it, show the version you love or redo it to a point where you love and throw that on your book. But don't get tied to something because you want it to look cool on your website. Your website can be whatever you want it to be, but you gotta come through. So again, feedback, everything. It's not you, and always keep the client in mind.
Plus 1 million on all those things. Yeah. Like my biggest lesson, valuable lesson is just listen. Always listen. Shut the hell up and just listen. Yes, you're gonna have time to ask questions, but listen. But yeah, I echo everything Amy said like a million times over. That is really the essence of the work that we do, really. Like it's not about you, it ain't about you. And if you don't like the end result, tweak it, for yourself and let them have the final thing that they're stoked about. Take drop like letting go of your ego, which is one of the hardest things to do, I think, as designers, right? Like we're like, I know this stuff, I studied this stuff, I got a master's degree, blah blah blah, whatever it is. We know how to do it, but you got to take that stuff out of it. It's not about you. It's about solving those problems for end users. You might be one of those end users, maybe, but there's a bunch of other folks that are going to be using that stuff. So those are the folks we're solving it for. It's not really us. So yeah, take yourself out of it. Listen, listen. Use those ears.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly right. One of the ways I've always helped myself to be able to get out of that position is recognizing like we as humans have bias. We just have bias that's just in us. That's all people have that. And whenever you go to certain meetings or you give a certain presentation, and you hear other people's bias about certain things, and like sometimes it can be really hard to hear it, or you might get really frustrated by it. And it's just recognizing that like that's just a normal human thing. And so being able to defend what you do, but not do it in the way that it's like being an authoritarian person, right? You can definitely stand up there, take an authoritarian stance and say, I know what's best, but that defense is it's very weak because you're just standing on yourself. And what tends to be a better position to defend yourself in is using data, using different types of research, using different types of feedback, really using that tools and that briefcase that you have. Because then when those questions come up, you can be able to, and they say, well, I'm not sure about this. You can say, well, it's not me who's picking it. We did research and it shows, this, and this. That's why it led to this decision. And then that starts to really, turn the conversation, right? And then I know we also talked about this idea of like about options, but it's like that's also another opportunity to do it there as well, where it's like you've not only used these different types of methods, but then now you've also, used this other side of psychology to do it. So, just recognizing humans are flawed, right? That's the whole phrase of I'm only human, right? And so just recognizing that and then coming to a position where you can defend it, but not do it from an authoritarian stance is something that I've found to be incredibly helpful. Because if I can't show it with data or be able to defend it besides saying it's me, then I know I'm in a wrong spot. It's probably wrong. And so, that's always been a really good thing that I've learned early that has really helped my career.
Man, one of the things that I learned in my career happened when I experienced burnout at Target. I had my sights set on a leadership role. I got that leadership role, and then flamed out in that leadership role. And I have learned that it's okay for your career to be nonlinear. There is no like destination in your career. I'm not trying to like reach the pinnacle. I mean, I was, but like that's not the destination. Turns out I don't want Brian Cornell's job. I really just want to be fulfilled by my work, and it is okay for that to be nonlinear. I can't remember who said it, but you know, like I think it was you, Simon, that there's like an opportunity for us to kind of like do whatever we want. Like our parents were oftentimes in a career for forever. And I mean, it's our opportunity now where we can learn things like relatively quickly and get like the resources we need relatively quickly in order to change careers. And that opportunity is open to us. I mean, I tried out teaching and like I'd never done that before, and that was really cool. And now I'm back doing product design because I found through teaching that I actually really love doing product design, and I really miss doing that, which maybe is why I flamed out in a leadership role. And so I just want to like it's okay to like have your career be nonlinear. And just because people around you might be seeking promotion and like trying to become a manager, like that doesn't have to be the same for you. Like your career can look like whatever is meaningful to you. And the comparison game is gonna be the end of all your dreams. You have no idea what those other people have been doing in order to get to where they are. And so comparing yourself to them is a very short game that's just going to end in disappointment. So if you're curious about what they have done to get to where they are, talk to them about it. Turns out it probably was nonlinear. How many of us can say that we found our ways into UX and UI on purpose? I don't think anyone on this panel can say that. And so like be okay with that and follow what is meaningful to you and what makes sense for your career.
Siri, they didn't even have UX in school when I went to school for it. So
Dude, same. Didn't even have smartphones in college, so not an option.
Yeah. It's funny because you say that because I mean, the story I tell people of how I got into this is that I literally went to the wrong class. Went to the wrong class, sat down, and then realized within 5 minutes I was not in the right spot, and then panicked for an additional 5 minutes. And then it was now that weird space of where like you can't get out after 10 minutes, especially when the professor's like, this is this class. If anyone's not here, you can leave. And then I just panicked. And so I sat through the whole thing and then realized I was like, oh my gosh, there's a profession that does this. So yeah, no one really gets into this field like on purpose. There's so many people that have done this that's been completely by accident, and I'm definitely a byproduct of that. So
That's great. The universe gave you a nudge, right? Sometimes you have to listen to the nudges when they come. We have one more question in Q&A, and I think this one's fun, but you tell me. It is, what's your favorite phrase? And they gave an example. Theirs is, if you can't solve it, you're playing by the rules.
My favorite is quit the yapping and make it happen. Like let's quit talking and let's just start getting it down. Enough. You know, those long kickoff meetings that go for 3 hours. I'm just like, oh my God, get me out of this thing, man. Okay, we've got enough data, I think. Let's quit the yapping and make it happen. Let's go. Yeah.
If we stick with the rhyming, I can say ditch the amigo or ditch the ego, amigo. I'll stick with that one because that can relate to so much when it comes to what we do, right? I mean, not even us creatives, but back to what I was talking about earlier, being able to do your job really well, especially in this creative space, that's a huge thing you can do for yourself. To Siri's point too, right? Like in what we do, it tends to be such a competitive industry and cutthroat, right? And so if you don't jump in that boxing ring and you don't decide to, be competitive if everybody else is, you're saving yourself some major mental health, protect your mental health, drop the ego, just do great work and listen to people and make them succeed.
I had to get the Post-it off my wall because mine, I don't know, I write everything down on paper. I think that has become evident. But do it for the journey is one. I have a lot of quotes on my wall, but do it for the journey. And what that means to me is that you're not saying yes to the opportunity for the promotion, for the next job, for the bonus. Like do it because you're going to learn something by doing it. Do it because it gets you excited to get up in the morning. And so do it for the journey, not for the destination.
I don't really like, mine is probably really sad, because everyone else's, which is so much better. I actually, I tell them, students sometimes, like when they ask me what human factors or user research is, I just tell them that like I'm in the business of telling engineers their baby's ugly. It's so that's just what I do all day. Because like they'll make something, I'll be like, that's I don't know about that. And the only reason why I mention that a lot of the times is just because I try to at least, let people know that, you're going to be coming into this profession and it's not as glamorous as you think sometimes. And that's okay. I mean, we get really excited as designers or as researchers, coming in, making the change and seeing the things happen. And like, yes, absolutely. But there's also another team, another group that you need to lean on for a lot of the stuff. And sometimes you might be in that business that you have those conversations, and it's not pleasant. Uh, but yeah, probably on a more sadder note. I should have gone first rather than last.
That's the best one, man. Come on.
It is great.
I might steal that. I might have to use that sometimes. I love it.
I love that you all had
Yeah,
them.
people might get upset at you. I don't know.
I'm used to that. That's not a problem, but yeah.
Yeah.
Simon, your quote just made me think of like the current project that I'm working on, and it's like totally an MVP, and like looking at it makes me embarrassed sometimes, but I'm like, nah, it's like a work in progress. Everything's a work in progress.
That is great. We are winding down to the end. We have answered all of the questions that we prepared and all of the questions in Q&A. So I just want to say on behalf of UXPA, thank you so much to our panelists. I know that this took a lot of time, a lot of back and forth communications, preparing slides, preparing questions. Your answers were amazing. Hopefully our members found them as beneficial as I did. Thank you to our members. You are what keep this thing going, right? And we couldn't do this without you. So thank you so much for believing in the cause and wanting to be a member and wanting to participate. Again, our February event will be in person. It'll be a fully hosted, so there will be beverages and food. And so we'll get to see everybody. And again, just thank you to everybody for participating in the chat, for proposing questions. We are so grateful. Have a nice 2025, make things happen, get to it, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you so much.